Runoff, which is an expert on stormwater, pond management, as well as runoff, and that's what we're gonna hear from you today. Is there anything else you wanna tell us about yourself?
Not really, that kind of covers it, yeah, so 19 years in county government, 2 years with state prior to that. And stormwater education and outreach and pond management was kind of where I was at for the last 10 years, so I was with the county. I decided I wanted to go back to like focusing on plant world, and I've been a master gardener for 5 or 6 years, so I really just kind of gravitated. I was a 4-H'er as a kid. I grew up in, was born in Collier County and just felt like that was my people and I needed to kind of go back that direction. I'm not gonna do that because of time's sake.
Can I ask you a question? How did you get interested in stormwater?
Actually, it kind of just led that direction. So when I started with the county, I was doing like water testing. So for 8 years, 9 years, I was just hanging off of bridges, collecting water and doing all the like science data collection and stuff for water quality. And then I have a very extroverted personality. And I was the only one out of all of the science nerds in our group that liked to actually talk to people. So I kept getting put into like school programs and stuff like that. And over time, I ended up in the, it's called NPDES. It's an EPA program for clean water. I ended up being the head person for the education program that was under that permit, which is a stormwater permit. So it just kind of led me into stormwater world. Yeah. Okay, so I called the presentation Protecting the Waterfront by Reducing Runoff. Because you guys know FFL and those last two principles, I think should be the first principles and not the last ones. Because they're the center of the reason why FFL exists is because of those water quality initiatives. I know we're talking plants with FFL, so right plant, right place is where they wanted to start. But at the end of the day, these are the reasons why FFL exists. So who's taken GIBMP, the Green Industries Best Management Practice class? You have? Okay. And I can't see it in my Zoomies now. Can they see the screen though?
Yeah, I think they can see the screen. I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. I just was curious whether they had seen any or had taken the GIBMP classes. Have you guys taken Green Industries for like the fertilizer certification? Some of them.
Yeah.
Okay. I recommend all of you, and I plug for my MGVs to always take that class whenever it's an option. It's a 6 to 7 hour class that we teach, but it's required for landscape contractors to have that class to be able to apply fertilizer. And the whole basis of the program is in water quality. So it mirrors, directly with the FFL program. And I actually let my MGVs help teach and train for some of their hours. So that'd be something that you guys, if you have extra time and you want to know what they're being taught, it's really good for you guys to hear it.
When the landscapers are required to take that.
Yeah.
So that they can apply the fertilizer.
Correct.
They take it once and it lasts forever.
Kind of. It's about 4 years, and then they're supposed to get a CEU if they're going to continue applying. So like for me, I've only taken it once and then I train. So if they have no intentions in commercially applying and charging customers, then they can just take it the one time and still say that they have the certification. But if they want to renew their license, then they have to get CEUs every 4th.
Okay, that's good.
I guess I can't change the slide, Cheryl, so.
Okay, this
You
one
want-
I'm playing around with.
So I know where I was starting with the presentation, it's about water. So sometimes I find that it's like when you start talking stormwater or surface water, like sampling, everybody starts to ask, well like drinking water, and the ponds and everything, everybody tries to like put all of the water resources in different like silos. But whether it's, the water in a wetland or the water in your canal or the water in your pond or the water that's coming out of your faucet, everything's connected, right? Come on in, guys. Through the water cycle, right? We're just moving water around and reusing that same resource. So trying to remember that no matter where you're at, like at the end of the day, this becomes your drinking water, right? Because it's going to filter into the ground and it's going to end up recharging. Same, like, everything's gonna end up at the beach, so, and we use saltwater desalination to make that drinking water too. So it's just kind of like reminding everybody that it's a limited resource and you guys need to think about all of the water as one water at the end of the day. So my objectives today are Stormwater 101, Surface Water 101. We're gonna talk about ponds, littorals, and then why FFL is like that. That's the message I want you guys to go out of here with and connecting that for customers. So what is stormwater? Like, that's what we think of, right, with stormwater, but at the end of the day, it's just untreated rainwater. So it picks up everything from our landscape and it ends up in these, culverts and drains. But ultimately, it's gonna end up being your drinking water. So we need to think of it that way. So everything that ends up in there is eventually gonna end up at the next location. And I find that in the, decade or so that I've been teaching people about stormwater, there's a misunderstanding about stormwater here in like our area. And in New York and New Jersey and other places in the Midwest, that everything's like combined together and goes to a treatment plant and gets treated. Here, everything is separate. So it's called an MS4 for a reason, because it's a separate storm sewer system. Things are not, like, the stormwater is not going to a treatment plant to get cleaned or filtered or, filtered and purified in any way. It's ultimately going into a natural water body at the end of the day and then out to the beach. So that's a big key message we always want to give to our constituents and any resident that you come in touch with, is that it doesn't get treated. When it says sewer, it's talking about flush water and sewage. When it says storm, it is just untreated rainwater, okay? So, it goes from the roof to the gutter, from the gutter to like the many number of different structures that you guys see or don't notice, in the normal landscape. And then the treatment train goes to a pond that's gonna look something like this. And then if you guys have ever seen that, have you guys ever noticed anything that looked similar to that in any of the neighborhoods? Okay, good. So you guys definitely are paying attention. That's a weir or a stormwater levee, basically. It's got holes inside and it's gonna capture as much water as it can, equilibrate for the engineering that they've designed it for, and only allow a certain amount of water to go out of that thing. But at the end of the day, that is, that's the stormwater structure that's gonna equalize how much water is allowed to escape or stay in your neighborhood. And not to overwhelm you with blueprints and whatnot, but just so you guys understand, everything is engineered, okay? It's like, it doesn't matter where you're at in our regions. There are no natural water bodies besides like Lake Trafford and a couple of other, old, lakes. Everything is an engineered stormwater system, in some way. Do you guys have any natural lakes up here? I know when I'm in Collier, I always say it's Deep Lake and Lake Trafford, and that's it.
Are there any natural lakes in the?
I don't think so.
Just the Caloosahatchee, which
It's just the river.
yeah.
So,
It's not even, it's dredged. It's not even there.
right, and that's the
Right.
same in our areas, like all of the rivers, the historic rivers have been channelized, right?
Yeah.
To become canals, so it's the same. But when you see these, that's the last stop before it's gonna go out to a natural, either to the next, creek or ditch, and then off, on its way down the canal system out to the Gulf. So that's what our standard canals look like. I'm sure that's what yours, so it goes from those weir control structures into something like that. And you'll never see the pipes most of the time unless the water level is like super low. And then eventually it's gonna, whatever water we can infiltrate or allow to sit in these like ponds and the canals will end up being groundwater. So if you guys have ever seen, anything like this in somebody's backyard, that is their drinking water well. Usually that's what they look like in Golden Gate Estates and Lehigh and Cape Coral. Anybody who's still on a well system, like we are in a lot of our areas in Collier, that's their drinking water they're pulling right from them. So if we can let the water sit in these ponds and the canals long enough for it to percolate through and become our drinking water, that's, what we need to allow as much as possible. And then if you've ever seen those, that's usually an outfall that's right here at our beaches. So that is stormwater at its best, just getting dumped right into, you know, the natural beaches and marine system. Okay, so I don't want to scare you guys too much, but I did want to give you the basic surface water, 101 conversation. So I pulled up some information for Lee County so that I could, answer some questions if you have them. But who's heard of a TMDL or an impairment? Who's done any background on water quality? And this is the only slide I have about this, so I'm not gonna go into this too crazy. But so the way the Clean Water Act and all of the water quality, projects are set up is we monitor canals and water bodies for a certain amount of years. So usually every 2 to 5 years, the state will come and do a pull or an assessment of all of the sampling that has been done. And I know you and I were talking about the sampling in the ponds, but in this case, it's almost always going to be a canal or it can be a river. If we still have an actual river anymore. But what happens over time is they do this data pull and they'll decide in this river, it's supposed to be a marine setting. It's gonna have a classification of what types of, how much bacteria is allowed in there, how much, E. coli or fecal, or how much nitrogen via nitrate or nitrite. They tell us exactly what is required for all of that. And over time, if the dissolved oxygen and the nutrients are regularly coming up with they're outside of what's considered healthy, then they go onto a list called an impairment. Okay.
About federal,
Mhm.
that's.
It's all
the
trickled
fed-
down
federal.
from EPA. So it starts with the Clean Water Act, it goes down to the state level, and then the state usually has municipalities like Lee and Collier that do the collection on the ground. And Lee County has a big water lab. And they do groundwater and surface water just like Collier. And then all of our data goes into a huge data set. All of that data goes into the EPA, or the state pulls for DEP, and then EPA will get it at the end of the day. So what happens is that if these things that are in here, nitrate, nitrite, TKN, all of that, come out outside of the range they're supposed to be, then eventually it'll go to a TMDL, which means that it's the next level of bad, right? It's called a total maximum daily load. And if 5 years comes and it's still the same, and 10 years comes and it's still the same, and 15 and so on, it stays on this kind of roster until they make it a BMAP, which is called a Basin Management Action Plan. Okay, and then once it becomes that, which is what you guys actually have now. Okay, so these 2 areas are a BMAP. So one of them is in my backyard, that's Imperial River, because I live in Bonita. And that means that the Imperial River is regularly outside of what's considered to be healthy, okay, for that system. So, what happens at that point is that the counties are told, you have to do something to fix this. So then more education and more technology and more infrastructure goes in to try to repair these things, okay? All right, so that's the end of that. I don't want to kill you guys with that. But I just want you guys to be aware, so that if anything comes up with customers, you always have that knowledge in your back pocket. Okay, so these structures are your last chance. So the way we're managing these is really important, okay? Because that is the last thing that we can control as residents before it goes out to these canals and becomes, a beach issue. So I just want us to make sure we're all on the same page on what these stormwater ponds look like. This is what we're dealing with when they're first built, okay? They're not natural. That's what they look like before we ended up putting the golf course and, the literal plants and everything into them. They're dredge systems engineered and designed to be managed a certain way. And one size does not fit all. They're not all, that plan that I showed you at the beginning, they're not all designed the same. You really have to do your homework to figure out what each individual, community is dealing with. If you're gonna help them with any of the stuff that is going on with these stormwater ponds, you need to understand how they're connected. And you're not gonna apply the same ecology or principles of landscaping or, dynamic to each system. They're all gonna have their own features and, distinguishing characteristics. But they can all look, you know, a little different and still be FFL, right? So like this one, even though we saw some algae, you know, you got some filamentous, it's like not all a bad thing. This one it was considered Florida friendly. This was a neighborhood we worked with, probably 15 years ago. And then this one too. So this was a neighborhood that's really close to going out to a marine water body in that North Naples area. So what we tried to get across to the customers is, yeah, we don't want turf to water's edge everywhere, but you have to plan and design things for your purposes and your recreation. It can't be a one size fits all, right? Like this neighborhood, they just had little landscape beds that they were pulling out to try to keep you know, mowing and activities away from the water body, but you still need to have clear eyesight in some locations and clear areas where kids might be able to fish or recreate or something. Everybody's situation is going to be different. So some of the problems that we see a lot are nutrients causing, you know, fish kills and algae blooms. And these are all things that I've dealt with even as a master gardener volunteer in the past. Like we've been called in to help, like what plants can I use? Well, it's like, well, you have huge washouts. You can't put plants here until you fix some of this stuff. So erosion's pretty common. Overgrowth of plants is always an issue. We can't let, you know, communities just let it go. Because they are managed systems that are meant to be designed a certain way for stormwater runoff. So like there has to be a capacity, and if you don't manage these things to that amount, you can have flooding in the neighborhood, because at the end of the day, it's supposed to be for flood control. But we want that balancing act where it's going to be healthy for the aquatic system too. And then if they just abandon it completely, hopefully you guys can see that this is like the same area on the left as it is on the right. So a lot of times people will just abandon them completely. Oh, we can't touch that area. You know, I see it happen with preserves a lot too. Like we don't go in there, we're not allowed to do anything. It was like, you have to do something. It was supposed to hold your stormwater. And now the whole thing filled in with plants, and not all of it was invasive. It just had like all kinds of stuff everywhere. So we want to go from something that looks like this to something more like this. There needs to be, you know, more plants to help us keep the water body closer to like a good ecology for the system and the water. So knowing your plants is key, right? Like all of the, you know, wetland species that are native here, they look like weeds, you know, we know this term. Yeah, I was gonna change to that one. Who you calling weed? Because like, what's a weed in my backyard is not necessarily what you think is a weed in your backyard. And these plants are supposed to be in our normal system. So I don't know if you guys have worked with any, you know, HOAs on your like, you know, boards and stuff in the past with like the plants that they want to put around ponds. But typically it's not ones that look like this, and it probably should be. Like as much as we can find grasses and like native, you know, weeds, they're gonna do better as far as long-term, you know, erosion control and water quality than what you're gonna get if you end up always planting canna everywhere and the duck potato or the arrowhead. Yes, they're really pretty, but they're not gonna give you as much bang for your buck as something like andropogon. And then understanding the plants that are there. So this one gets a really bad rap. It's called Cara. And it's a submerged aquatic that people tend to hate, and they want you to come and, you know, remove it as quickly as possible. But it's a macro algae, and usually the only treatment for it is copper, which heavy metals end up being a major like pollutant issue in Collier, which I would imagine they probably are here too. So, you know, somebody just yells at the lake manager, come out and get this, you know, take care of this. It looks horrendous, but this is actually a native, you know, like food source for a lot of our waterfowl and fish. So it's a balancing act, making sure that you know what plant is there and whether it actually needs to be managed, and allowing the community to, you know, just leave the native, you know, submerged aquatic plants there until they, you know, cycle naturally, or you can remove them mechanically instead of like treating them with heavy metals to get rid of them. And then this guy gets a bad rap too. So the spike rushes, I get tons of complaints on spike rush, and yes, it can get big. It will get, certain species of it will get to about 4 foot. So if the water body is only 4 foot, it's gonna make a nice 4 foot ring all around the entire pond, but it's not gonna go at 8 and 9, 10 feet into the middle. And people think that it's gonna take the pond over. So it's just, knowing the plants. So at the end of the day, understanding that protect the waterfront, we want these low maintenance zones. If you don't want to see the weedy, grasses growing up around the edge, then plant something that you like. Or mix it together where you've got some stuff that you like to see with some of the natural stuff. But we gotta get the landscape contractors away from the water's edge. Because the grass clippings and all of the things that are getting thrown into the ponds all the time become additional nutrients. That are ending up as, these impairments for our natural water bodies. So, yeah, this is just my take home message. FFL is all about, water protection at the end of the day. So, the IPM stuff is all based in using less chemicals so that there's not, as much chemical runoff. And, obviously fertilizing and watering efficiently, all of those principles still are like based in that foundation of protection of water, because we don't want you to use too much fertilizer because it's gonna run off. So that's it. Guys have any questions? Thank you. So my next couple of slides are actually just, key things for you guys is going forward. Like if you live in a community, try to understand what your community stormwater system is. Somebody has a copy of that plan that I showed at the beginning. That you can, pull those documents. If you ever need help, I'm gonna give you a website in a second that will let you go to the South Florida Water Management District and pull the stormwater plans. But you really need to know, like the board president and everyone needs to understand how things are connected, because when you treat one thing, you need to know where it's going. So get familiar, make sure you're telling customers that stuff. Understand what the BMAPs and the TMDLs are in your area. I'm gonna give you a website in a sec. Make sure that if you have a pond in your neighborhood, you're advocating for protection of that pond. Make sure that you can keep, but this is where that reducing stormwater runoff, comes in, is, use the rain barrels, advocate for people directing those gutters back into the landscape as much as possible. Using a rain garden if you need to, but trying to keep water at the source is always gonna be better than, shipping it out to the landscape to pick up all of the junk that's in our neighborhoods and then in the culverts. And then make sure that you're just passing the message along. So these next ones those are the websites. I had printed it. I told Cheryl I printed like these last couple slides so that you guys could have it to take home with you. And then I forgot it on the copier last night. So if you guys haven't used that stormwater pond website that UF has, this is the URL for it. And then this is the one that you can learn about more of the water quality issues in your neighborhood. If you wanted to have like a more thorough conversation with people that you're dealing with at some of these workshops.
Will we be able to get a copy?
She has a copy.
I will send it
Yeah.
to you
I told me write this down.
with
Oh.
links.
Yeah, and
That's a lot
then this one, this slide can take me like 5 minutes or so to get through. So I figured I'd put it at the end. This is my checklist of what you look for a healthy pond. And again, this was just a resource I wanted you guys to take home so that you have that background knowledge when you're dealing with customers. So.
One of the things I took home from your presentation in Collier
Yeah,
was the fountains versus the underwater pump. Could
aerators,
you
yep.
touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure, if you have a minute.
Yeah.
Okay,
We're here.
Yeah. You're
yeah, so the talk I gave at our garden workshop series was an hour, so obviously I put a lot more information. This is very summarized, but just so you guys understand for your own communities, fountains are not the same as aerators. So if they are purely aesthetic in like 90% of the cases, unless it's a bottom drawn fountain and it's actually like pulling from the bottom and then spreading out, they are only for aesthetic purposes. So I generally do not advocate for communities to install them. Because of that reason, it's not actually giving you any like nutrient cycling or additional oxygen. You have to have one of the bubblers that's like, installed. at the base, and you'll see them like kind of going like this at the water surface. So those are actual aerators that will help with like nutrient cycling. And the cost for some of those mountains and the complaints I've gotten over the years from like, it's loud, it's always going on outside my window, and the maintenance involved, like, I really do not advocate for fountains, but the aerators can help in some cases. I just always like the customers to do their research on the aerator, because there's lots of different ones, and sometimes they're not even needed. You know, they won't even know what the oxygen levels are, and they think they need an aerator. Like, I always want to pair everything together with like the actual data. You know, you think that there's a problem because, oh, it never looked like this before, but I didn't look like this before either. So ponds age and they look different over time, right?